Rain has not been my problem except the hurricanes.
Hurricane.
Now, the
Yeah.
hurricane Helene last year, that was tremendous.
Hello and welcome back to First Press Daniel Dawson Talks Olive Oil. I'm Daniel Dawson. On today's show, we'll be looking at the first results from the C. Olivar project, which measures carbon sequestration at 15 olive grove plots in Spain. Then we'll move on to a truly terrible article on Medical News Today that shows the need for better communication about olive oil health benefits. And finally, we'll round out the show with an interview with an award-winning olive farmer from the U.S. state of Georgia talking about the idiosyncrasies of olive farming and oil production in the Peach State. But first, you may have noticed that I did not record an episode last week. That's because I was audited by Uruguay's Public Health Ministry. Two inspectors came to see the olive mill, the well that supplies its water, and pour over documents. I was surprised by how little time we were in the mill and how much time they spent scrutinizing cleaning and quality control procedures and my water well. They read a multi-page contract I've signed with a pest control company, which is mandatory in Uruguay, and scrutinized the results of water analyses and olive oil analyses. They also read some of my personal quality control documents and questioned why I measure the speed of the mill and take the temperature in the malaxer. Interestingly, they did not ask what I do with my olive pomace, the disposal of which could negatively impact public health far more than the temperature of my malaxer or the speed of my mill. For the record, I give my olive pomace to my neighbor to feed his sheep and chickens in return for eggs. The inspectors also told me that I must register my well with the National Well Registry, which means I need to hire a geologist to do a geological survey, and knowing Uruguay as well as I do, I will probably have to pay a significant fine for not doing this in the first place. But moving on to the news, we begin in Estepa, Spain, where the first results from the C. Olivar project have been unveiled. Researchers have followed the carbon sequestration potential of 15 olive groves in the Andalusia municipality, each of which follows a different cultivation system. They found that the combined 440 hectares sequester 412 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per annum. The project's objective is to increase the amount of carbon stored by the olive groves, including the trees in the soil, and devise a methodology to calculate carbon credits for olive growers to sell on voluntary markets. However, their findings have confirmed previous research that not all cultivation systems sequester carbon equally. Traditionally spaced groves with crop cover between trees sequestered the most carbon. Researchers said, assuming their results are scalable to the world's 11.7 million hectares of olive groves, the sector could capture almost 11 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually. If you ask me, there's huge potential for olive farmers to become certified carbon credit producers and sell both on voluntary and mandatory carbon credit markets. This is an area where national and regional policymakers need to put in more effort to help growers through the certification process. The International Olive Council has taken the first steps, but any government authorities that prioritize lowering greenhouse gas emissions need to put more effort into these types of efforts and give up on less effective avoided emissions projects, which are highly speculative and vulnerable to fraud. Moving on, and we come to the misinformation from Medical News Today. In their article titled, Avocado Oil versus Olive Oil, What is Healthier? The writer and medical reviewer conclude that avocado oil is as healthy as olive oil, and they both have, quote, some health benefits. The article bases this claim on the fact that avocado oil and olive oil both are mostly comprised of monounsaturated fatty acids. However, researchers in Chile, one of the world's largest avocado producers, have established that oleic acid comprises up to 50% of total fat in Hass avocado oil, the dominant variety. Oleic acid is the main monounsaturated fatty acid in olive oil, making up as much as 85% of its total fat content. So if we are only measuring by healthy fats, avocado oil is not superior. While monounsaturated fat is linked with higher good cholesterol production, which lowers bad cholesterol, the overwhelming majority of olive oil health benefits are tied to phenolic compounds. The associated benefits with cardiovascular disease, brain health, and anti-cancer properties come from polyphenols. And extra virgin olive oil generally has far more polyphenols than avocado oil. The highest polyphenol count measured by researchers in Chile was about 220 milligrams per kilogram in virgin avocado oil, which seemed a bit of an outlier compared to the rest of the data. There was only one other sample that had more than 100 milligrams per kilogram, and then the rest were floating around the 100 mark, but slightly less. Meanwhile, extra virgin olive oil usually exceeds this count, with some oils exceeding 1,000 milligrams per kilogram and many others topping 250 to 300. This is not to say that avocado oil is not a healthier alternative to other seed oils and animal fats. It undoubtedly is for the same reason that olive oil is. However, the science does not show that avocado oil is as healthy or healthier than olive oil. Medical News Today also says that avocado oil has a higher smoke point than olive oil. This may be true, but extra virgin olive oil smoke point is perfectly fine for the vast majority of domestic cooking. Overall, it's disappointing that Medical News Today is concluding that there's no clear winner when comparing avocado oil and olive oil. This is not what the scientific literature says. I hope they revisit this article and do their own research a little bit better next time. My guest today is Curtis Poling from Woodpecker Trail Olive Farm in Georgia. We discussed the origins of Georgia olive farming, which dates back to the founding fathers, and the distinct challenges of growing olives in the southeastern United States, among other topics. Good morning, or good afternoon, Curtis. How are you? I thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well, and thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today. I appreciate it. So, I've been reading a little bit about Georgia, and I think it's an interesting state because when most people think of the United States, they're thinking, or olive oil production in the United States, they're thinking of California. But as I saw on your website, I saw that Thomas Jefferson actually brought olive trees to the United States in the early 1800s. He tried to plant them in South Carolina, it didn't work, and then he tried to plant them in Georgia. So could you tell me a little bit more about that, and then how that experiment from one of the founding fathers later evolved into your project?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I have a copy of the letter from Thomas Jefferson.
Wow.
And Thomas Jefferson was a fascinating gentleman. In 1787, thereabouts, he was traveling in France, and he noticed something interesting. He noticed that farmers on non-tillable land were producing income off of olive trees. And so he had a dream of introducing olive trees back to America because the Spanish had success with it 400 years ago here in Georgia. And in this letter, Thomas Jefferson is writing to a gentleman named John Cooper on St. Simon's Island. I have the whole history here. And he says, John, you're really successful in agriculture with wine and grapes and citrus. I think you should bring olive trees back to Georgia because I tried it in Virginia. It was too cold. And I tried it in Carolina and the farmers were too lazy. And so he convinced John Cooper to put he convinced John Cooper to put a couple hundred trees from France. It was interesting that 2 generations later, olive oil to Atlanta, and they actually competed against Italy and Spain in the quality of olive oil, and they won an international award back then in 1891. And here's a national souvenir spoon from that event. 2 million people attended it. So here we had this beautiful history of olive trees growing in Georgia. And so, and what's another interesting part I've got to bring up here is that while this was going on, a gentleman named John Wesson Vegetable Oil Company said, forget olive oil, I can make cooking oil cheaper with cottonseed. And he started crushing cottonseed, taking the stink out. He got a patent for it. And so we lost the olive oil industry here in Georgia. And now we're just getting it back again a couple hundred years later.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that there were 2 separate initiatives that worked together. There was a researcher from the Georgia Department of Agriculture who was looking for a more drought-resistant crop after the severe drought that the state experienced in the 21st century. And then there were another group of farmers who were planting olive trees to see whether it would work out. And so I understand, I've never been to Georgia, unfortunately, but I understand it's similar to a Mediterranean climate, but much more humid. So could you describe a little bit,
yes,
if you haven't been, how it is compared to maybe a California, Spain, or in Italy?
Yeah. Well, actually, the parallel here is 31.92 and 3, and it matches Turkey and Jordan. It's very similar in growing temperatures, and I went back and researched that. Humidity is a problem. It's 30% higher, but I think it's a contribution to giving us a different taste and flavor in olive oil. It does have an impact, I think, on our tons per acre. due to the fact that when the trees pollinate in the spring, we get a lot of rain, and that kind of defeats the process of pollination. So we're trying to overcome that. And I got a whole nutrition panel that I research, and I've been getting better at this over the decade I've been doing this. And if we increase our boron and we triple it, we're able to increase the pollination tube and so the pollen doesn't have as far to go. So we're still trying to get the tons per acre up. It's going to take time, but I think eventually we'll figure it out.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I live in Uruguay, and it's also quite humid here. It might be a little less humid than it is in Georgia. And one of the things that olive growers in Uruguay have found over the past 20 years is it's very difficult to plant super high density because the trees are too close together. The branches are too close together. Not enough air is getting in. Too much humidity is building up, and you have an increase of a fungi, kind of like anthracnosis. I see that there's a lot of super high density in Georgia. So what are olive farmers
Yes.
doing to mitigate that? And specifically, what are you doing to mitigate that?
Okay. Well, yes, we got super high density, and I started out originally. I planted my first tree 5 feet. I put 800 trees in per acre with the intent of machine harvest. But I discovered that in this climate, it's better for medium density. I'm a small boutique producer and grower. I'm not trying to be in the grocery store chain. I'm trying to sell mine as a high quality health benefit olive oil. So I found that my olive production increased over medium density over the super high density. It's very difficult to prune. It's very difficult to harvest them when I do mine by hand. So I abandoned machine harvest and went to medium density. Um, I think I'm doing something new. I'm doing a combination of medium and high density now. I'm going every 14 feet and 13-foot wide rows, so I can do either way. And I think that's going to be the best because the humidity and the airflow encourages a lichen to grow on the trees, and that's detrimental on the lower branches.
Yeah. Okay. So in those super high density groves, I think it's mostly Arbequina, Arbesana, and Koroniki that people are growing. But I saw that you have Arbequina and you also have Lucca, the Italian variety. What
Yes.
made you plant that? And then what other olive varieties are you growing?
Oh, well, as amazingly, I've got about 12 different varietals now on the farm. So I've had the flexibility to experiment. And Arbequina was my primary tree. But what happened is on my second planting, I planted 2,000 Pequoff in Spain and thinking it was going to be wonderful. Well, guess what? I lost all but five. So I got 5 token left, and I said, forget Pequoff. And so I experimented. I brought in Luca because I went out to California in San Luis Obispo. I saw it was a great tree. It was a hardy tree. It was grafted from the Frontoya from Luca from the University of California, and I thought I'll try it. So I brought them in. I haven't lost a single one. And then I said, well, I'll experiment with others. Then I decided to study where Thomas Jefferson went, and I found out he had a tree called Sinaloc or Salonique, depending on where you enunciate it, from Provence, France. Those are wonderful. Those trees are incredible. I planted those late 2018. They have not lost a single one. They're a big producer of olives. So I now am a believer in the Lucca, the Sinaloc or Salonique, depending on what you want to call it. And I've introduced another one called a Tonchi, which was a French varietal. And I'm experimenting with a couple of others, but most Italian varietals do not make it here in Georgia except Lucca. And I did plant some Coratina in November, and they look like they're gonna do well here. I'm trying a new growing concept here with these grow tubes that are supposedly going to make my trees grow faster, and I'll let you know in a couple of years.
Okay. Well, I'll definitely have to follow up and see how that's going. Okay.
Yes.
And then, so are you making monovarietals or is it a blend? How do you think about that when you're planning the harvest and harvesting?
Well, we started out with Arbequina, and then we started adding the other trees, and so I try to separate some, and we hand pick it, and so we'll run the Arbequina, and at the end I'll mix in the Luca, Tonchi, and some others, and then I have a bottle here called Estate Produced, and then that ends up being a mixture of everything on the farm. So I've got two blends right now. Well, uh, one Arbequina pure, and then the blend.
Okay. Okay. And then, so as you mentioned, you're a boutique producer. Are you selling a lot in Georgia, or do you sell a lot online to the rest of the United States?
Believe it or not, I ship all over the country. As a matter of fact, I was just putting an order. I got orders going out every day around the country. I ship to every state, United States. Uh, and that was an order from Minnesota. I shipped to South. I shipped to Alaska, Texas, California, New York, the U.S. territories, and it's all viral. And people reaching out, and they feel good about buying a U.S. Georgia-grown oil. And locally, most folks don't know much about olive oil. But in North Georgia, yes, in the larger cities. But most of my customers are in the big cities of North Georgia, and then the rest of the United States. And I've got quite a few customers. I've shipped every state, so I'm pleased with the growth.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. And so in the amount of time that you've been producing your olive oil commercially and selling it, what change have you seen in the U.S. market? Have you seen consumers changing the kinds of questions they're asking, or looking for different kind of flavor profiles, or what's changed basically?
Yes, a dramatic shift in health benefits. Matter of fact, there was an article, it's on the wall behind me, AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, 3 months ago wrote an article by a writer for what I guess New York Times, and talking about the health benefits of olive oil, on how Georgia is now discovering that it can grow olive trees, and we were mentioned as a pioneer, and now we're seeing consumers buying oil from us based on our health benefits and based on our polyphenols and my lab results, and I post them on my website. Like this, and when we get our certification from Applied Sensory in California, they're buying it and drinking it in shots, and
Uh-huh.
so we're now discovering that the consumers have shifted from trying olive oil from Georgia to the fact that we're producing a good quality olive oil for the health benefits, and mostly what I'm finding out, people want to reverse their bad habits. Go
I
ahead.
think that's a big challenge that everyone's facing, right? Is you do have a lot of people who are they're used to kind of the fustiness, or the rancidity taste of olive oil. If they get an olive oil that's too bitter or too pungent because it has all of those polyphenols, they're not used to it, and they think that something's gone wrong in the process. So there's a lot of work to shift to
Right.
that perception.
Point something out. Being the fact I'm on the East Coast, we got 2/3 of the population base, and we get a lot of folks that come here. We do tours, and we do tours every week. And they've been to Italy, they've been to Portugal, and they like the fact that they can come here, and this is where the Mediterranean connects with Georgia, and so we've got some sophisticated consumers too in the group, for the fact that they've been to Italy and Spain, have been educated, and they're now happy to see that they have access to olive oil here on the East Coast of the United States.
Okay, yeah, no, that's interesting. And when do you begin harvesting generally?
Well, last year we did September 19th, the previous year was the end of September, and the prior year was October. We're seeing it get shorter and shorter now. I this year may be the first week of October, because we had a colder winter. But September and October is good for us. We're way ahead of the game with everybody else, it seems to be,
Okay. Yeah, because
when it comes to harvest time.
I spoke to another producer a couple of years ago for kind of a producer profile in Olive Oil Times, and they told me that they were harvesting at
Yes,
the end of August, the beginning of September, and they said that gives them a real advantage because they've got some of the first
yes.
pre-harvest extra virgin olive oil on the market, and they're able to use that to their advantage to marketing and get it out there, start shipping before competitors in California have finished their harvest, or before competitors in Europe. Is that the same experience you've had? Does that give you an advantage in Georgia?
Yes, I think it's advantage to be started early. And I like to get a mix of 80% green and then 20% ripeness. And if I wait till the middle of October, it's too ripe.
Okay. Well, so yeah, no, very early. If the middle of harvest, in the middle of October, it's already too ripe. That's a very early harvest. Okay.
That's when I have a U pick day. I have folks come out and what's left over, I let them pick olives to make table olives if they're pickle them.
No, okay. Oh, and so do you actually going back to the oleo tourism for a second? Do you have harvest days where people can come and they can harvest the olives and then they can kind of take them to the mill and they can see the process by which olive oil is made?
No, I actually during the harvest day we do not have volunteers. I found out in the early years it was gotten away, and so now we know we got hand pickers and we use H2A workers here, and I have to be focused to get it quickly off the trees and then cool it down. But a few weeks after that, I allow folks to come out and pick what's left over so they can take home and make table olives and pickle it, and that becomes an interesting project for them.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I think it's always good to get people out into the olive groves because I think it gives them a different kind of understanding of what makes olive oil different from, say, like sunflower oil or soybean oil or something. The idea that you take the olive off of the tree,
Yes.
see the work involved, and
Well, I let people eat the olive off of the tree as well, and they understand that it has to be processed, and they finally understand that deer do not eat olives off the tree because we have a lot of deer.
yeah. Oh, okay, that's interesting. No deer not eating olives off the trees. Yeah, I have a neighbor who has an olive grove, and she told me that horses are fine; they don't eat the olives, but the cows will just eat through the olives, and then she had to build a separate pasture for the cows from the olive trees as a result.
Yeah. Well, if we don't have too many predators here in Georgia. We're lucky.
Okay. And so how do you see the future of the Georgia olive oil sector? Do you think more people will plant? Do you think you've kind of reached a point of maybe homeostasis where you're producing exactly what you want to be producing, or what does the future hold?
That's a good question because on my website I offer an education class, and every couple of weeks I have folks come in here, sit here at this table, and they spend 3 4 hours researching to be olive farmers. I've had some folks north of me put some farms in, buy some land. I had some folks last week. They have a couple hundred acres. They're looking at trees to put in, and I think it's bright, and I'll tell you why. Because we got a huge investment from the Italians. They invested $50 million in a big operation over here by Bainbridge and Colquitt, and we've had about four international awards where we won some awards for NYOOC over the years, and so Georgia can present the fact that it can win awards and get the high quality oil. I mean, I'm getting my certifications, certified extra virgin olive oil from Applied Century in California, and I get my analysis from grape wine analysis out in California, and every year my free fatty acid numbers continue to get better. And we started out originally and we were 0.3, and now we're at 0.06. So I think Georgia can produce a very good quality olive oil, and more folks I think are coming, and so I think it's bright.
Okay. Is there any concern about rain during the harvest? I've spoken to some producers and they say that one of the challenges they'll have is come middle of October, end of October, the rain starts to come down and makes it more difficult to get out into the grove, especially if you're harvesting mechanically.
Rain has not been my problem except the hurricanes.
Hurricanes.
Now the
Yeah.
hurricane Helene last year, that was tremendous. And a couple of weeks before that, we had a huge torrential downpour from another hurricane, and it was a foot and a half of rain. And I saw some stress on my trees. The tonchi took a lot of stress because it was too much water for them. So that was my concern. But I honestly haven't had a problem with harvesting with grain. That has not been my concern. My concern is hurricanes.
Okay.
It's hard to stop those.
Yeah, no, that was gonna be my next question is that you're kind of you're there, the hurricanes will come every single season and but you haven't found that to be much of an impediment, I guess, if you're harvesting early enough in the year, or are you watching the
No,
weather
no.
throughout the season?
Yeah, we're fine, and we were lucky enough that we harvested and the hurricanes hit after that point. And hurricanes don't present wind damage because the tree's root system is vast and shallow. Whereas the pecan growers here locally, they had a lot of devastation from wind damage. We didn't have that. I had no damage at all from that. But by picking the harvesting the olives earlier, I don't think we have a concern from the hurricanes having the impact in that area.
Okay. Are you guys also at tornado risk? Because I understand that some growers in Georgia have faced tornado risk and incurred some damage that way.
There's tornadoes risk, but they hit small areas and move on. I've not seen that a problem here. In my county, I've got some kind of a microclimate. They just kind of divert around here, so I'm not concerned about tornadoes.
Okay, that's interesting. That's lucky. Maybe that producer was just done lucky then, unfortunately for him.
Right.
Okay. And then so kind of moving on to current events. Right now, we're kind of waiting to see what will happen with the Trump administration's tariffs. But there had been 10% baseline on basically every olive oil importer. And then I guess depending on how all of these deals go and when we reach the July 2nd deadline, we'll see whether some of them go up or not. And from your view, as a producer, do you think the tariffs are helpful for making U.S. olive oil more competitive in the marketplace in terms of price? Or do you think it's not helpful because there's so much potential for olive oil consumption in the U.S. that making it harder for people to be introduced to olive oil is a lose-lose?
I think the tariffs have very little impact on consumption for Americans. 10 years ago we're like number 10 on the scale, and now we're number 2 consuming olive oil. And I don't think it's going to have much impact. And as a matter of fact, I'm purchasing bottles right now, and I had maybe a 5 to 6 cent increase in the bottles, and that's nothing. I'm not even going to pass that on. So I don't think, since Americans are consuming so much olive oil, it's not going to be a problem for us here in the United States. Now, I know it's going to have an impact in Europe and in other countries, but here for us, it's not going to be much. I mean, during COVID was a more stressful period of time for us. COVID was dramatic because we couldn't get bottles, but now we can get bottles that are just more expensive, but not much more.
Okay, that's interesting. So it hasn't really raised the import costs. And I mean, I guess it's still a little early to tell whether it will raise olive oil prices, but I mean, hypothetically, if it were the worst case scenario for the European Union and they had the 50% tariff on basically all of their imports, would that make a difference for you if those prices were passed on to the consumers?
Yeah, well, if that's passed on, it's going to be difficult. That'll be a dramatic increase for European product for sure. And it's going to make consumers want to shift more to U.S. produced olive oil. Time's going to tell. I mean, it's political. I try not to get pulled into it. The tariff seems to be a moving target right now. It changes, so we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, that's what people seem to be saying. They seem to be saying that we'll wait and see. I talked to a lot of producers in Europe, and the vast majority of them, they'd finished their harvest before the tariffs came in April. And now they say, well, the situation is so fluid, it changes so much that this is something that we'll reassess in October when maybe we have a more defined policy.
Yes, there is something I wanted to add, and there's something going on in the industry that's I don't know how to present this, but there's negativity that I think the industry needs to back off. Talking about fraud and talking about traceability, and then more testings to prove real olive oil, and consumers are just starting to understand the benefits of olive oil, using it on a regular basis here in the United States. And I don't find that it's a discouragement in some ways, especially for new farmers that want to get involved in this industry. if you're a young person, I'm trying to encourage, the Z generation to get involved. And I think the industry needs to back off a little bit on its negativity and, its press and so forth, and talk more about the positive impact of buying from the grower producer and the health benefits, and then let the industry, the agriculture departments, and let those folks figure out, where the fraud and all that, let them manage that. Keep the consumers out of that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think when they had that UC Davis study, and they had that sensational headline, but they didn't specify that it was a small scale study done on select supermarkets in a relatively small geographical area, and this wasn't like a longitudinal study. I think that did a lot of damage, and I think it's a real shame that, and I mean, I know the folks at UC Davis, they didn't intend to do that, but I think it's a real shame that is still frequently cited in media, and you do get a lot of, especially like YouTube influencers talking about, oh, this is how you tell if it's real olive oil, or, oh, click the link in my program that gives me an affiliate commission, and that's where your real olive oil comes from. And that's a little bit about the idea of what I'm trying to do here is I want to push back on that. I see it all. It makes me frustrated. And I thought, well, maybe I should try and do something about it. But yeah, that's a little bit of the idea of what we're doing here. I agree. I agree that the conversation needs to focus more on the health benefits, and then also the sustainability, since you do have quite a bit of evidence that shows people are looking at sustainability when they're buying products. So you need to be pointing out that olive oil can work, or olive trees work as a carbon sink, rather than seed oils, where those are being taken out every single year and replanted, and they're using more fertilizer and petrochemicals to harvest and produce. I think that's what the
and that's exactly what, and that's what we're sustainability, fair trade practices, the negative carbon footprint, and being connected to the grower and producer personally. These are all important attributes and assets that we project here.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And so thank you again for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I always enjoy talking to producers from lesser known olive growing regions. I think it's very interesting to learn about their challenges and showcase how diverse the olive oil world is. So thanks again to Curtis for coming on the show, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'll be back next week with another episode. Please get in touch with any feedback or critiques. My email is at the bottom of the screen below.